On this super review, let's take a look at the Magaosi K5. Am I saying it right? Magaosi? Sorry about that. I'll call him Magaosi. So what we've got here is the K5 from Magaosi, which is an in-ear monitor. And as you might be able to discern from the name, it's got 5 drivers per earphone, 5 balanced armature drivers to be more precise. And now the K5 is a model that's actually been available for a while now. But pretty recently, I've actually had a couple of different people ask me about the K5, and I don't know if it's coincidence or is there like a recent resurgence in interest in the K5, but this is an earphone I've been interested to check out, so I've got it here. Apart from the fact that it's got 5 balanced armature drivers per ear, I actually don't have a ton to tell you about this earphone at this point, except that it costs around $180, so not budget. But also not stupid expensive. You know, these things are gonna be up against things like the Eco OH10 or the Tin Hi-Fi P1. These are earphones that weren't out when the Magaosi K5 originally came out, but they're available now. And I'm interested to see how these things stack up to those. So let's go ahead and open up the box. We'll find out what we get inside with the K5. And then I'll spend some time living with this earphone and comparing it to some other more contemporary earphones. See how they do. All right, at this point, I've spent a number of weeks listening to the Magaosi K5s. I've listened to these things more than I have with most earphones that I reviewed. And part of that is because I've been lazy lately, and I'm sorry about that. But the other part of it is that I really like the K5, and this is a spoiler right now, but this is, frankly, I think this is a really underrated earphone. And it might be my new favorite earphone. Like, just to tell you how much I like this earphone. Okay, this is, again, another slight spoiler. and when we talk about the physical aspects of it, but just to tell you how much I like this earphone. I wasn't the biggest fan of the color that I was sent for review, but I liked the sound of them so much that I actually ordered a second pair with my own money and got those delivered to me. And I waited weeks for those things to arrive from China, just because I liked the way that these things sound so much and I wanted them to look as good as they sound to me. So, well, I'm gonna go ahead and put these things away. And I'm gonna pull in the pair that I bought. There we go. That's more like it. These are my Magaosi K5s, and like I said, this is definitely one of my favorite IEMs, but I guess I'm gonna have to tell you exactly why it's one of my favorite IEMs, and to do that, I'll start by talking about the physical aspects of the K5. Now, build-wise, these things I think are built really, really nicely, especially the buds, the IEMs themselves. They are a nice solid resin, which I just kind of love. I love the way that this thing looks. I love the way that light bends through these things. You know, it's a 5BA earphone. There are no dynamic drivers in this, and because of that, there's no venting. A side effect of that is that when you're wearing the K5s, they give you actually really good isolation. Now, it can give you a little bit of a sort of suction cup feeling, but I guess I've kind of gotten used to it because it hasn't bothered me at all with the K5s. And by saying I've kind of gotten used to it, I think I've just gotten used to it with other IEMs before, because it's definitely been an issue for me when I reviewed some IEMs, but it wasn't an issue here with the K5s. What else can I say? I think just, I don't know, again, aesthetically, I think they're a very nice looking earphone. The stock ones, or the black ones that I was sent, I think that those things look pretty nice too, but just the way that they've done the coloring on the outside panel, I don't think is that well done. So here I ordered just a pair of purely clear, zero coloration. The only coloration that really comes through is that the Magaosi logo is in gold on the inside of it, and then the gold from the MMCX connector kind of bleeds out, and it gives these things a little bit of a yellow hue from some angles, but otherwise it's just a perfectly clear IEM that I think looks really nice. It's built really nice. And did I mention it actually fits really just exceptionally well? So the shape of these things is kind of like, it's kind of looking like a custom in-ear monitor, and obviously these things are not custom. You buy them and everyone has the same shape. Now, I've tried some other IEMs that have this sort of quasi custom shape, and usually they fit really well, but sometimes I'll have slight issues with them, right? So like with the BGVP DM6, I found that those things fit a little bit big and bulky. The FIO FA1, those fit pretty well. I don't think I had any issues with those at all. There's the QDC Neptunes, which have a similar fit, but those are a little bit particular in they create a pressure point in the inside of my ear. With the K5s, I have no such issues. These things just fit me perfectly. They plug in. They plug in super easy. Like, there's no fiddling with them. They're always a really good fit. And like I mentioned before, the sound isolation is exceptionally good with these things. Even though, and this is worth calling out, the tips that I've got on these things are fairly shallow fitting tips. It comes with more classic fit tips as well, but the ones that I've got on it are very similar to the ones that it comes on it stock. And they're fairly shallow fit, which I think makes it comfortable, but you don't sacrifice that noise isolation. So I'm totally happy with it. On the topic of tips, worth talking a little bit about the things that come with the K5. So it comes with a pretty big selection of ear tips, including some more classically shaped ear tips, some shallow fit ear tips, and then these double flanged shallow fit ear tips, which I tend to like. The K5 also came with actually a really nice little carry case, probably one of the better carry cases that I've had packed in with an IEM. In fact, like most of the times when I get carry cases, I don't use them because either they're a little bit big and bulky, or that's pretty much it. Usually they're just a little bit big and bulky. And I found that the carry case that these things come with, it's, you know, like a fake leather, like pretty much everything else, but it's just got the right amount of size and the right amount of plushness, and it's a hard case that I'm happy to use it, and I appreciate that. The K5 also came with, interestingly, a Bluetooth cable. So it comes with a Bluetooth MMCX cable that you can use to turn your Magaosi K5s into a Bluetooth earphone. I think that's kind of a cool touch. I didn't spend a ton of time, I'll be honest, with that Bluetooth cable because with a headphone like this, I'm in this for maximizing audio quality, and putting it on a Bluetooth cable, as good as it could be, is gonna be some sacrifice there. Now, worth calling out is the Bluetooth cable that these things come with is actually a pretty solid cable. So over Android, I was getting an aptX connection, which is awesome. The sound quality I actually thought was surprisingly pretty good. The only major downsides, and one of them is that there's pretty significant amp hiss, which is, this is a pretty sensitive IEM. Not super sensitive, but it's pretty sensitive. And it's gonna definitely bring out amp hiss in something like that Bluetooth cable, and it does. The other issue, and this is actually probably a bigger issue for me, is that cable, every time you skip tracks or change volume or really do anything, even if you don't do it through the cable, even if you do it on your phone, the cable beeps. It's making beeps just all the time, and I find that unnecessary. Look, again, I'm probably not gonna be using that. Well, I'm definitely not gonna be using it because it beeps, but I probably wouldn't have been using it anyway. Oh, I totally forgot to talk about the cable. So the cable that you see here on my new replacement Magaosi K5, this is not actually the cable that comes with it. Again, because I like this earphone so much, I'm just kind of optimizing it to my personal aesthetic, and this is not the cable that you get with it. The cable that it comes with is actually not a bad cable by any stretch. It's a pretty decent little cable. It's a little bit kinky sort of at the top, and by kinky, I don't mean that it's into weird sex stuff. It's got some bends in it, and it's not a big issue. It keeps it feeling a little bit tighty, the way that I feel about these things, right? And a lot of the times with an IEM, as much as we are into it, well, as much as I am into it for the sound, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I think this is true for a lot of people. As much as I'm into this thing for the sound, I'm also just really into it for the fit, the comfort, the aesthetics, how I feel about my music, and how I feel about the devices that are delivering that music to me. And for something that I like as much as the K5s, for me, it was worth customizing it with this aftermarket ENU cable. All right, so enough talking about the build of this earphone. Let's go ahead and talk about how the K5s sound. And that is where I gotta say, these things totally deliver on what I want them to sound like. This is a very clean, crispy, clean sounding IEM that you could call neutral if you wanted to. It's not exactly neutral, but it's mostly a neutral sounding IEM. It's mostly a mid-range focused IEM. So yeah, let's see, just very clean, very clinical, not a warm sounding IEM at all. There's, I would say, just an emphasis on clarity here, if that's what you're into. And that for me tends to be exactly what I'm into. So let's go ahead and talk about the tonality a little bit. So the bass, despite it being a relatively neutral IEM, I would say that the bass is slightly north of neutral, not a ton north of neutral, but it's probably about on par with, maybe a little bit more bass than what you would get out of something like the ER4 XR, the Etymotics, right? So it's a little bit more bass than that, but not a ton more. I find the bass to be nice and punchy, nice and well defined. It's got its space, which overall, like a character of the sound of the Magaosis, is just a nice spaciousness to it, and that bass, it contributes to that. If I had any criticism of the bass on the K5s, it's just that it is still balanced armature bass and it's not a dynamic driver. That difference, if you haven't heard it head to head, basically a dynamic driver is going to give you a little bit more body, a little bit more balance, and it's going to feel a little bit more physical, versus the bass in a balanced armature headset tends to just not have that body. And I would say that is true here of the K5s. It definitely sounds like balanced armature bass because that's what it is. And then when it comes to the mid-range, and I mentioned that the focus of this earphone, in my opinion, is that mid-range. It's overall, again, a really strong clarity sort of tuned mid-range. It's not a warm mid-range like you might get on something like the ER4. The etymodics are a touch on the warm side, which is to say that the contrast between the lower mid-range and the upper mid-range is not super strong. Here, there's a bit more emphasis on the upper mid-range, which tends to really bring out vocals. And I think that this is a really nice vocals sounding earphone. It's very pleasant and very smooth, basically at all times. That's kind of similar to how I would describe the treble on the K5s. This is I don't know, it's a somewhat bright sounding earphone. And okay, yeah, I think you could call this a bright sounding earphone. So scratch all that nonsense I said about it being neutral. It's got slightly north of neutral bass. It's got slightly north of neutral upper mid-range. And then the treble also feels a little bit emphasized, a little bit bright. But I don't ever find it fatiguing. I find that the treble on this is basically just about where I want it. It's always smooth again, just kind of surprisingly, right? Tends to, or you know, with other earphones when you have a lot of emphasis in the treble, and I wouldn't say there's a lot of emphasis here, but when you have some emphasis in the treble, you can risk sounding fatiguing. But I don't ever get that with the K5s. Maybe a touch of sibilance, you know, in tracks that have sibilance, you know, in them. You're gonna be able to detect that sibilance here, but it's not especially bad. And in fact, I would say that overall these things handle sibilance a little bit better than the average earphone. Not the best, but better than average. Maybe the upper treble doesn't have quite the detail that you would get in some other IEMs. You know, something like the Tin Hi-Fi P1 is tuned a little bit more for upper treble. And maybe you could say that these things don't have that same detail and maybe it lacks for that, but frankly, I don't know. Just overall, I'm really, really satisfied with the tonality of the K5s. And backing up that exceptional tonality, I think that the sound presentation of this earphone is really, really good. Like it gives you a really, at least for me, a really nice head stage. I'm hesitant to use the word soundstage. Head stage kind of, to me, describes a little bit more about it sounding. It still feels like it's in my head, but the separation and the definition between all the different sounds is really pretty surprisingly strong. And it makes it a really fun earphone to listen to. So you get your bass, you get your vocals, you get your cymbals. It all feels nicely positioned in 3D space. It all feels, you know, in my head still because it's an IEM and it doesn't do what an open back earphone or headphone does. But overall, I think that head stage is a defining character of the sound here and part of why I really like listening to the K5 so much. So it's worth me comparing the Magaosi K5s to some of my other favorite earphones in roughly this price range. And one of the earphones that I actually use the most is the Magaosi CP. And I still really like the way that the CP sounds, and compared to these things, I can't say that one necessarily sounds better than the other, but the tuning is different. So the CP definitely leans more toward a little bit of a warm tuning. I think that if you're looking for a little bit stronger bass emphasis, you'll get that with the CP. Mostly it's going to be a little bit more mid-bass emphasis, which gives it a little bit of a warmer character. But overall, they're both pretty good sounding. I think that if I had to pick between the two, I would pick the tuning of the K5s just because, again, there's no warmth here, and that tends to be what I want. Just really strong clarity, nice vocals emphasis, and a little bit more treble intrigue here with the K5s versus the CPs. Now, versus the Tin Hi-Fi P1s, the sound signature between them is actually, I think, more distinct, and maybe part of that is because the P1 uses a totally different driver, right? Both the Magaosis and the Magaosis are all balanced armatures, and the P1s are a planar magnetic driver. The big difference, and I don't know if this is necessarily the driver doing it or the tuning, but the P1s, I think, have kind of a richer, more organic tuning to them, where again, these still feel like they're tuned more toward clarity and a little bit of vocals emphasis. The P1, I think I mentioned this when I was talking about the treble, it's got actually fairly soft lower treble with another sort of emphasis in the upper treble. And what that does, maybe that's what contributes to that organic sounding, that organic feel of it. But it does tend to give hi-hats a really nice bite to them that The K5s still do it pretty well, but it's something that's a little bit extra special on the P1s. Just in terms of sound signature between these two, between the K5s and the P1s, again, it's pretty different tuning, so it's hard for me to say which one I prefer, but I slightly prefer the P1s. Unfortunately, the P1s, they don't fit and look like these. And so I think I'm still gonna end up using these things much more than I use the P1s. So out of 5 stars, the Magaosi K5s get all 5 of my stars. In fact, if I had more stars to give them, I'd give them all, because I really, really like this earphone. I think that build quality wise, aesthetic wise, this thing is just about perfect, especially here in clear, right? If you get the colored versions, maybe that's what you're into. If you like the black, you like the blue, you like the red, that's fine. Personally, I'm really into these clear ones, and with this Yin cable, I'm feeling it. It's not just a good aesthetic, it's also a really nice fit, nice comfort. I can wear these things all day, and they block out my coworkers, which, if they're watching right now, I'm sorry. You guys are great, but sometimes I need some silence, and these things do it. The sound signature, again, is basically exactly what I'm looking for. Strong on clarity, very low on warmth, nice bass punch, great mid-range, and enough treble intrigue that they keep me interested. Again, a lot of what I like about the sound here in the K5s is that sound presentation, that head stage, the layering and the separation and the positioning of all the different instruments. It just makes it a really entertaining earphone to listen to. And I think this is a really underrated earphone. And what else can I say? If you're interested in checking out the Magaosi K5s, of course, I've got links in the description down below, and while you're down there, you can hit the like button for the video. If you liked it, you can subscribe to the channel, and then I'll see you on the next super review.